So last week we started this series, and we saw that there's just a little bit of fortune teller in all of us, and you know that this is true because something has happened in your life, and then you have thought or said, I should have seen this coming, right? I should have seen this coming. All of us have had seasons where we find ourselves in a mess, and then we replay in our mind everything that led up to that mess, and we realize, man, I don't know why I'm surprised. I should have seen this coming. And yet, seeing our own future, I think sometimes is tricky. It can be a little tricky. So you know what's easier, right? Seeing other people's future. It's so much easier to see this coming for other people. And we have all thought or all said this, okay, you should have seen this coming, right? You should have seen this coming. I mean, right now, you have a roommate or you have a friend or a brother or somebody that you know, and you're watching the way they keep making decisions, and you totally see what's coming. Okay, all of us have a little bit of fortune teller in us, and it's because of a principle that we looked at last week. It's what we call the principle of the path. Okay, the principle of the path, and it's this: that your direction determines your destination. Okay, your direction determines your destination. So the path you're on, the road you're on, will determine where you end up. Okay, your direction determines your destination. We all know this. You're like, why are you even bothering to say that? We all know this, right? If you want to end up at a certain destination, you have to get on the right path or the right road or the right flight. You have to be moving in the right direction. This is so obvious to us when it comes to traveling. And yet it's amazing how often people ignore this very same principle in other realms of everyday life. For some reason, in everyday life, there can be this massive disconnect. And you hear this disconnect when you listen to people talk, right? You're listening to somebody whose life has crashed and burned in some way. Maybe their marriage has blown up, or maybe their career has gone sideways, or they've had serious issues with their kids, or they've struggled with drugs or alcohol, or they've just sort of fallen away from God. And you listen to their story, and they're telling you that their hopes and their dreams, their intention was to go somewhere over here, but they chose a path that was headed directly this way, and it led them over here. And now there's all this pain and regret and anguish and disappointment. And yet they're confused about how it happened. And so they blame other people, right? Or they blame bad luck. Can't believe this happened to me. It's just bad luck. Or they blame God. But you look at what happened and you think, well, what did you expect? I mean, you're just dealing with the reality of ending up right where your path took you. And you're not surprised because of this simple principle. Your direction determines your destination. So for these few weeks, we're taking time to just pause and evaluate. Where do I really want to end up? Really, where do I really want to end up? And am I on a road that's taking me there? If I keep going the direction that I'm currently going, where is it going to take me? Where will I end up? And today I want to get us going with just a little observation. And here's the observation. More and more, we are living in a right now culture. Don't you think? I mean, we want really big things to happen. We want them to happen immediately and with very little effort. And we expect that. In fact, if you're a millennial, don't be afraid of this. Would you raise your hand if you're in here and you're a millennial? Oh, my word. If you are a millennial, is this not the stereotype of your entire generation? Right? Mm-hmm. Are you a millennial? You are a millennial? Okay, you're speaking from the inside of this. I thought that was directed at the millennials from someone above it, and I was like, wow, that was aggressive. You're admitting yourself. Okay. Right? If you're a millennial, this is the stereotype. The stereotype is you're not patient. Right? You want big results with very little effort, and you are unwilling to stay with stuff for very long. And now this is the stereotype, and with all stereotypes, I know tons of millennials that don't fit into this stereotype. I know tons of you that don't fit into this stereotype. Some of you do. But I'm just kidding. But I do see, as a entire culture, are we not shifting a little bit? Is this not affecting our entire culture? More and more, we are reluctant to just sort of stay with stuff. And more, I think what's happening is we underestimate what we can do in the long term, but we overestimate what we can do in the short term. And this can be like a real roadblock for people. Because we look at a short period of time and we think that we should be able to get so much done and so much should happen and this should be so easy. And we try to do it all in the short, and then we look at a long period of time and we way underestimate what we can actually accomplish if we were to just take baby steps for a long period of time. Stick with it. I mean, as a culture, more and more we just have increasingly short attention spans. And so we tend to jump ship the minute we're not happy anymore. We bail if something starts to feel kind of hard. And because we often lack long-term investment, we often fail to see significant results. Now, this is no more true than in the church world. These days, I'm going to have a little quiz for you guys. How long do you think the average pastor stays in a church? Like the lead person in a church stays in their role as the lead pastor of a church. Just whisper it maybe what you think to the person next to you. Okay, these days, the average pastor stays in a church for less than 3 years. Less than 3 years. Okay, so if I'm the lead pastor, I come in, I kind of get to know people, I cast a little vision, and then guess what? I'm gone. And I mean, you think about that, you go, what in the world could you possibly accomplish in a community of people within less than 3 years? That is insane. How can you make an impact in a community or in anybody's life if you don't give yourself long enough to kind of hit your stride? Now, this is true in all kinds of arenas of life. It's true professionally for a lot of people. It's true relationally. It's true in learning new skills. It's true in developing knowledge around certain topics. We overestimate what we should be able to get done in the short term, but we way underestimate what we're capable of doing in the long term. And so today, I want us to consider something. If you keep going in the same direction for a long time, you just keep going and keep going and keep going, where might that take you? What might actually be possible? And so today's message is all about time. How in the world do you let time be your friend? How do you let time work on your behalf? How do you make the most of the time that you have? And here's what I think makes this so powerful and beautiful for us who follow Jesus. When we follow Jesus, we entrust ourselves to Him. We aren't just living life on our own, kind of in our own power, but we're engaging in the most beautiful thing, like the kingdom of God. We become participants in the kingdom of God moving all around us. And I want to read you a thought-provoking passage from the Apostle Paul. And if you're kind of a skeptic, if you're somebody who's kind of a skeptic about Christianity, then you can really relate to Paul. Because Paul was as skeptical of Christians as you can possibly be. He thought that all of them were just, all the followers of Jesus were just deceived. And he was convinced that Jesus was a complete fraud. And so Paul, a Jewish religious leader, a Pharisee, was actually hunting down Christians and imprisoning them. But while he was leading this massive persecution, most of you know, he encountered Jesus, like the risen Jesus. And that encounter changed everything for him. He went from hating Jesus and followers of Jesus to becoming one of the most influential, probably the most influential Christian in history. And Paul was so overwhelmed by what God was up to in Jesus that after resisting it all initially, he just decided to give his entire life to it. And he explained it better than anyone. Like he spread it further than anybody. And Paul had always in his life wanted to travel to the city of Rome to tell people there about Jesus, but he'd been unable to go for various reasons. And so he wrote a letter that's become very famous to the Christians, the few Christians that were already in Rome and had already come to believe. And his letter to the Romans, what we often refer to as the book of Romans, just a letter that he wrote, has been one of the foundational texts for Christian faith and what it means to be a Christian, what Christianity is all about. The good news of Jesus is explained thoroughly and clearly, and I think it's one of the most profound writings of all time. But toward the end of the letter, after he's explained what Jesus was like and what Jesus accomplished through his life and his death and his resurrection, toward the very end, Paul reflects on what it all means. And he invites us, those of us that would say, I am a follower of Jesus, he invites us to be awake to what God is doing all around us. And he's saying to us, guys, this is incredible. Don't miss it. And so he starts with this. He writes, but make sure that you don't get so absorbed and exhausted in taking care of all your day-by-day obligations that you lose track of the time and doze off oblivious to God. Man, do you ever feel absorbed in all the trivialities of life and then kind of exhausted? You ever feel like you've become kind of numb and unaware of what God is doing? And it's so easy for all the pressures and demands of life to kind of come in and crush us on this. We have day-to-day obligations, and we get consumed, and we get overwhelmed, and then we can kind of fall asleep and be unaware of what God is doing all around us. Paul continues. He says, the night is about over, dawn is about to break. Be up and awake to what God is doing. God is putting the finishing touches on the salvation work. Everybody say that with me. Salvation work he began when we first believed. Paul says that God is putting the finishing touches on his salvation work. What in the world does that mean? What is God's salvation work? Well, I'm about to go all Southern preacher on you. And so brace yourselves. The moment you put your faith in Jesus, you were, the theological word is, justified. You were justified. Okay, you were declared, what does that mean? It means you were declared not guilty of all sin, past and future. Because Jesus did the time, Jesus paid the debt, you are declared not guilty, okay? You're justified. And then one day, Paul lays out for us very, very clearly, you will see Jesus face to face. One day you will see Jesus face to face, and on that day, if you put your faith in him, you'll be glorified. Glorified. Because you've said, I want to be like you, Jesus, and I need help. So make me like you. Give me your heart. Give me your love. Give me your kindness. Help me be fully controlled and surrendered to the Holy Spirit. Give me and fill me with the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, all of that. And Paul says you can bet on this. Jesus will grant your wish. And he will complete all of it. And he will look at you and he will smile and say, I'm so glad you asked. And now it's finished. And the struggle with sin and selfishness will be over once and for all. And Paul's like, it's going to be extraordinary. And we call that, glorification. If you're a Southern preacher, it is glorification. So it started with justification, and then one day there will be glorification. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you are living in the in-between. And in the meantime, Paul says Jesus is up to something beautiful. Day by day, moment by moment, as you follow him, as you stay connected to him, he makes you more and more like him, bit by bit by bit. And the theological word for that is sanctification. So we are sanctified, right? We're sanctified. So first we're justified, One day we'll be glorified, but in this life, we are continually sanctified. And I really want us to feel this. And so I want you to say sanctified with me, but I want you to say it in a robust Southern style. You ready? All right, say it. Come on, say sanctified with me. 1, 2, 3. Sanctified. Yes, it's good. God is putting the finishing touches on his salvation work. And Paul goes on, he says, we can't afford to waste a minute. Can't afford to waste a minute. We must not squander these precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence. He's saying, don't live a life that has no meaning. Don't live a life that's got no point to it, trivial, shallow. And don't indulge the parts of your life that are detached or separate or are not what Christ would have for you. Don't feed that stuff. He said, figure out how to feed the right stuff. And Paul finishes his thought by saying, get out of bed and get dressed. Don't loiter and linger, waiting until the very last minute. Dress yourselves in Christ and be up and about. And I love the picture that he's painting with that. Like, don't lay around to sleep. Get up and dress yourself in Christ. And I guess if I were trying to summarize this very rich passage simply, I might just say it this way. God is up to something amazing. Wake up and take part in it. Like, you can sleep and you can miss out, or you can get up and get dressed. You can walk out into the dawn and start experiencing power. So I just want to be clear. This message in this series is not about self-help. Okay, it's about entrusting ourselves to the process of sanctification. It's about allowing God to do something transformative in us. And so for the rest of this message, I want to share with you 3 very simple principles. And the first one is this. Okay, future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. Isn't that deep? Future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. Now, we tend to think about the future like rather romantically, and it's this big mysterious thing. Oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm going to be like. Who am I going to be in the future? Well, here's the thing. You're going to be just like you, only exaggerated. Okay, only older. And if you want to know what you're going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, then just imagine a more exaggerated version of who you are right now. I mean, if you're somebody who's really kind today, you're going to be even kinder in the future. Because things deepen. These things get entrenched in us. If you're somebody who's generous today, you're going to be even more generous in the future. And if that's you, then you just picture yourself as an even more generous person. Someone that looks a lot like you, but older and more generous. And I think about that, I go, that's pretty cool. Imagine a kinder, more generous you. But if right now you are a kind of a cruel person, then future you is even more cruel. If today you're a highly negative person, future you will be even more negative. Like, envision the people that you know that are like 70 years old and older. They tend to become sort of extreme by that age. Have you noticed? They're extreme, especially if they don't have people in their world saying, hey man, have you ever thought about, I have met, maybe you have too, I have met some really crabby, crotchety 70-year-olds. And you know what they were like when they were 30? You know what they were like? They were crabby. And they were negative, but with smoother skin. But the crabbiness has gone unchecked, and so it's just escalated. And this happens with selfishness, and this happens with pretty much everything, right? It just happens. But you can see this with love, and you can see it with joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control as well. In fact, when I think about what this looks like, it just seasons with age. And when I think about our little church community, little Brookview, there is always a person that pops into my mind, and I have talked about her before, but the last time I talked about her, she wasn't here. And today, she is here, and she is such an extraordinary illustration of this, and her name is Eloise Rankin. You guys, is she not a beautiful woman? And if you know Eloise, you are a lucky person because she is beautiful. But more than just on the outside, she has this like gorgeous character. I think of the fruits of the Spirit of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And Eloise, you really do embody those to me. You really do. And I see how you love your kids. I see how you love your grandkids. I see how you love all the different people in your life group, so that if I say to one of them, you should lead a different group, I'm actually afraid of you. But other than that, you are the sweetest person I know. And when I'm with you, here's what I feel. I feel loved by you. And I feel valued, and I feel respected, and I feel admired, and I feel like you're in my corner. And just the joy, if you know Eloise, you know the joy, it just bubbles out. Even though life has been very, very tough for you in certain seasons, there is this inextinguishable joy. I think about when Al, the love of your life, went to be with Jesus. And I just remember how the joy remained through all of that. Your smile and your laugh just continued to melt hearts through all of that. And peace, like the peace of you. It's just like you are a person at rest. You're not trying to prove yourself all the time. You're just at rest. You're not, and you're free to be content, and you're free to love, and you're free to serve and give. And patience, it's there. You're not easily angered, and you're so steady. And just the kindness. My goodness. I mean, just one of the kindest, most thoughtful people that I know. Now, I didn't have the pleasure of knowing you when you were 30. But in a way, I kind of feel like I did. I bet I know what you were like. I bet you were all of those things. But I bet that what's happened is over the years, they have taken root and they've matured. And you've lived your life in pursuit of the good. And you've gone on this amazingly long walk in the same direction toward character and toward goodness and toward Jesus. And now the fruits of the Spirit, they just embody you. And so I just want to say, I'm so lucky to know you. And you're a blessing. So, and when you first came to church with Al, I was like, they will never stick here. They are way too old to hang around with this group, but you've done it, and you've been a blessing. And my point in all of this is that who you are didn't just happen all of a sudden. Eloise has become a more exaggerated version of who she's been the whole time. And this is how it works. It's not all that mysterious. Okay, whatever path you're on, future you is just a little bit further down that path. Now, Proverbs says it this way, and this is a little bit of a warning as well as a blessing, but it says, the one who seeks good finds delight. The one who seeks good finds delight. The student of evil becomes evil. Whatever direction you're going to get farther into it. So when you think about future you, just realize future you is simply an exaggerated version of current you. Now, if you're sitting here and you're like, well, yeah, but wait a minute. And you're just like, that's okay, I hear what you're saying and I kind of get it, but that's like really fatalistic, Pastor. Don't we believe in a God of change and hope? Yes, we do. Are you saying I can't change? Are you saying I can't become something better? Here's what I'm saying. Please don't misunderstand me. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. Just more of it. Okay, which leads me to my second thought on all of this. If you don't like what you're getting, you have to change what you're doing, right? And this is the good news. If you don't like what you're getting, you can change what you're doing. In the last few years, I've been kind of measuring my life in this way. I'm just sort of asking myself and doing this self-diagnostic every so often on a regular basis. And I'm just asking myself, am I seeing the fruits of the Spirit in increasing measure in my life? Is there an increase in love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control? Because Paul says, if things are working right, if sanctification is actually happening in me, then I should see these things in increasing measure over time. And every so often, I do a little heart check and I ask, okay, am I seeing the fruits of the Spirit increasing in me? And a few summers ago, I was going through this little diagnostic, and I realized this is not going well. And I actually came to church and I confessed to you guys. Some of you might remember that confession. But I confessed that that season of my life, I was not in a good spot. I was doing my standard assessment, am I seeing the fruits of the Spirit increasing in me? And it was blatantly obvious to me that I wasn't. And so for about a 5, 6, 7 week period, I realized I'm moving in the wrong direction. Like, in a moment of honesty, I realized, I am slowly becoming less loving, less joyful, less filled with peace, significantly less patient. And all this stuff just started kind of bubbling out of me, and I'm like, what's going on? Now, part of it was we were walking through some heartbreaking things with our son at the time, and we still are. There has been some beautiful stuff recently, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But at the time, he was in a psychiatric hospital, and he had been for months and months, and things for him just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and we were watching him fall apart. And during that season, I had these periods where the despair of it all just felt overwhelming. And I don't mean like sadness or disappointment. I mean like these waves of despair that I just couldn't shake. Times that I had just completely lost hope. And then one day, a separate event happened in my life that was really a clue that something was off with me. And I was like, what in the world is going on with me? Like, what's happening in my heart? And so here's what happened. Jen and I were driving Brooklyn to a basketball tournament a couple years ago. And we were going to Ballard. Tournament was in Ballard. We were on I-5. And Jen was driving so that I could draw up the defensive and offensive schemes on my little coach's whiteboard for Brooklyn and run through all of that. And also because she was also driving because Jen is a control freak and she doesn't like me to drive. But Brooklyn was in the back seat, and we're talking hoops, and I'm illustrating everything, and I was coaching, like helping coach the team at the time, and so the little board and doing all of that. And she and I are running through the offense and the defense and all of that, and it's all going fine. We get to the part of I-5 where we need to exit, and so Jen needs to cross over and exit to the right, but at the same time, in that particular place, there's an on-ramp coming on, and you sort of do this, right? So she's trying to get over so she can get off and take the exit, and there's a guy in a truck coming on, and he's trying to get onto the lane so he can get on I-5. Well, he just continually goes the same speed as Jen. So she slows down to go in behind him. So he slows down and stays right in her way. She speeds up. He speeds up. She slows down. He slows down. We're running out of room, right? So Jen floors it, goes in front of the guy and gets over. And the next thing I know, I'm turning around looking at Brooklyn, and all of a sudden, it was like my head was going to go through the windshield. Jen slams on the brakes because what had happened is this guy got ticked off, and he got in the lane on our left. He floored it, then cut over in the lane on the right and slammed his brakes on. So she slams her brakes on. We're like this. The whiteboard's like flying. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I look up, and the guy is telling Jen that she's number one. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is unreal. And I felt this like wave of rage and anger and adrenaline and all of this stuff. So I looked at him and made sure he was looking in the rear view. And I told him he was number 11. And so I'm just like, ah! Then I grab the whiteboard and I turn around and I look at Brooklyn's in the back seat like, Dad. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it just hit me. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what is happening? Like, okay, so that was an irritating thing that happened, but the rage level was just off. And I was like, this is a sign that something is going on in me. And so Brooklyn, she's like, no, Dad, it's okay. No, Dad, it's okay. And I'm like, it's not okay. And if you ever do that, I am going to smack you. And so when I shared this a while back, I talked about needing to make some changes. Like, I was like, I'm not in a good spot. And I'm still preaching. I'm still here. I still love Jesus. But I'm realizing I'm not in a good spot. I need to make some changes. And I talked about needing to take care of my soul. And the reality is, God has helped me with that. And I am so happy to tell you guys, I have not flipped off anyone since then. Yeah. Some of you are like, oh, that's what that was. Yeah, that's what that was. And over the last couple of years, I really do feel God working in me. And generally speaking, I feel like God is leading me to a good place. But this last summer, I had more tough stretches. Not like the summer of road rage, but and of the unshakable despair that I felt in that season. And not seasons as dark as that, but summers are kind of tricky for me. And this last summer, I felt some of that. And I find that it's just harder to be consistent with the practices that feed my soul in the summer. And maybe this happens to some of you guys too. In fact, I'm pretty sure it does. But my routines can kind of get all out of whack, and it doesn't take very long before my heart feels it. And I found that I really, really depend on certain practices. Like reading scripture is a big deal for me on a regular basis, and then journaling and reflecting on it. Practice like we call soaping. Gathering with other believers, being able to worship. All of that stuff is really, really important. And that stuff becomes kind of irregular for me sometimes in the summer. And while I get more of a break, which is awesome, like, yeah, I get a break and I get some family time, and I get away for a little vacation and all of that, what happens is if I'm not careful and I don't figure out a way to engage in the practices that feed my soul gets starved. And I don't like who I start becoming. I am not a good person in the summer, you guys. I mean, there's this selfishness and anger and just scared. Everything makes me nervous. I'm grouchy. I'm impatient. And I've got to find ways to re-engage things that feed my soul. And I'm doing a better and better job of figuring out what that looks like in the summertime. This last summer was much better. But even so, there's still some rough stretches. And so I'm learning to pay attention to my soul. And I just want to say today, some of you might be in kind of a similar boat. There's something going on in you these days, and it's been going on for a while, and you don't want that to be exaggerated. Like you're taking small steps in the wrong direction these days, but if you forecast that out, you don't like what it's going to become over a long period of time. You do not want an exaggerated version of that. And if so, I would just encourage you, take it seriously. And if you don't like what you're getting, you're going to have to change what you're doing. And maybe you're like, well, what should I do? How do I change? What do I do? I have no idea. I mean, everybody's individual in here. The issues are different. But I will say two things. First, start with what you already know. Start with what you already know. My guess is you already know something you should do. You already know. And so start with that. And then once you're in the process of doing that, ask God to show you what's next. Like you actually don't need the full plan to just get started. Take the first step that you can take and then ask God to show you the next step. But even if you're in a spot where you're like, I can't even think of a single first step, then I would simply say this. This is going to sound so pastorally. Ask God. Like pray about it. Talk to him. Ask him. Ask God to reveal it to you. Ask God to show you the way. And here's why this is a valuable thing to do. Because he delights in doing that. If you're wanting to go in a healthier direction that's more Christ-like, he will meet you in that and he will show you the way if you honestly continually come to him and say, God, show me the way. Okay? He delights in doing that. But here's the thing. When he shows you what it is, do it. Like you have to do it. But don't wait for this one big time, all I have to do is this one thing and everything will change. More likely, it's going to be a very simple, very ongoing thing that you need to do regularly again and again for a long period of time. And that leads me to my final observation about all of this when it comes to growth or accomplishing big things, and it's this. Ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. Have you noticed that? Small steps in the same direction over a long period of time will take you a lot farther than a big-time sprint, a short sprint. And that reminds me of Eloise again. When her husband Al went to be with Jesus, I was deeply struck at the memorial because I realized that Al and Eloise had these incredibly close, like long-time, lifetime friends. People had come from all over to be at the memorial. And I realized they'd had the same friends for decades and decades. And when those friends came and they got up on stage and they spoke about Al at the memorial, you could feel the depth of their love and their respect for him. Like they had known Al and Eloise for so long that their friendship and their love just ran so deep. And I will tell you guys, you may not know this, Eloise has some of the best friends in the whole world. She really does. She has people that know her and have virtually known her whole life. And these are friends that you only get by going on a very, very long walk together. Okay? And they prioritized those relationships years ago, and they maintained them over a long period of time. And even when they lived in different parts of the country, a couple times a year, they would always gather and make sure they connected. And they would write to each other, and they would talk to each other on the phone regularly. Guys, you can't get friends like that on a weekend. Like over one weekend. Even if it's like, best weekend ever, you just don't get friends like that over a weekend. You get friends like that by sharing a long life. Ongoing consistency is much more important than short-term intensity. And this is true with pretty much anything that matters. It's true with friendships. It's true with marriage. It's true with parenting. It's true with achieving great things. It's true with learning to play an instrument. I mean, I wanted to learn to play clarinet when I was in 5th grade because my mom said I couldn't play trumpet because we lived in a condominium. I really wanted to play drums and trumpet, but I had to play clarinet. But I tried really hard one day to learn to play clarinet. Really hard. Didn't go that well. I was still last chair with all the girls in my clarinet section, and they just looked at me like, you loser. So guess what? I gave up clarinet because it didn't work. If you want to learn to play a musical instrument, it's going to be the consistency over time. It's true with learning a skill. It's true with career development. It's true when it comes to our character. And if you keep going in the same direction and things keep getting deeper and better in an incremental fashion, it's actually astounding what can happen over a long period of time. And this phenomenon is called, by scientists, it's called the phenomenon of compound interest. Albert Einstein said it this way. He said, compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. He who doesn't, pays it. It's just, like if something just keeps growing by 50%, again and again and again, it just keeps growing and growing, the growth will eventually become unbelievable. I mean, the principle of compound interest is, and it's not just a financial principle, right? It's actually a principle of growth in any realm of life. And this is why staying with something over time is so powerful. Now, I shared an illustration of this a few years ago, but if you're a bit of a science nerd, you can nerd out over this. The guy describing this, he's a nerd. He is exhilarated by the science and the mathematics of this, but he gives us a demonstration of compound interest, not in the realm of money, but in the realm of Dominos. And this is awesome. Let's roll this 1-minute video.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino, which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes, and the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds, and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
Is that not incredible? Even for you non-nerds, is that not, the 29th domino would be the size of the Empire State Building. The first domino, he had to hold with tweezers. And just by increasing 1.5 times per domino over time, and this is how compound interest works. Things get huge. But here's the deal. You can't stop, right? You can't stop at the third domino and say, well, I don't see very much happening here. This is stupid. Right? The only way you're going to see the big change in the realm of compound interest is to stay with it. And we want big results. We want big results with no effort right now. That's just not how life works. And you have to keep walking in the same direction for a long, long time. Like even if your steps are small, if you keep walking, if you keep going, if you keep stepping, it's amazing what can happen over time. C.S. Lewis warns us that this is true for both good and evil. And he writes this. He says, good and evil both increase at compound interest. You watch somebody that suddenly develops an addiction of some kind, and you see how quickly and how crazy life can spiral out of control. Compound interest is always in play. It can work for you, or it can work against you. It all depends on what direction you're going. And so small, consistent steps will lead to large outcomes. And that can be really good, or that can be really not good. Like if you keep doing what you're doing, it's going to increase something exponentially. So as we kind of think about wrapping this up, I just want to leave you with a reflective question. Where are your little steps taking you? Where are they taking you? Because future you is very predictable. It's going to be more of whatever is happening right now. So where do you need to keep going? Where do you need to keep walking? Where do you need to keep doing what you're doing? And God would just be saying to you, don't give up on that. Don't give up on that. Keep going. You've got it. Stay with it. You've got it. Where do you need to keep going? Where do you need to keep walking? What in your life is good? Keep going that direction. But if there's something in your life that's not so good, you really don't want compound interest on that. You don't. And this morning, I want you to hear from a guy who has thoroughly lived out all of this. He was going a distinct direction in his life. And when he thought of the future, he really didn't like where it was all leading. He didn't like the picture of the exaggerated version of himself. So he decided that if he didn't like what he was getting, he had to change what he was doing. And he organized his life around some very consistent practices, some steps. A practice that has set him free to live very differently. And he's engaged in this particular core practice for 29 years. And I'm going to let him tell you all about it. But would you welcome Bob Crozier as he comes up?
Good morning. My name is Bob Crozier, and I wrote everything down. I'm going to read it to you. Otherwise, we'd be here till 3. So my story goes like this. My life was very much a one-purpose existence. I wasn't in the process of doing it. I was always figuring out how to. Whoever had the best deal was who I was going to hang out with. I actually finished high school with a blood alcohol content higher than my GPA. Now it's funny. I was told that I could attend the ceremony, but only from the stands. I was not allowed to walk with my class. They would mail my diploma. After high school, my prospects were limited, and I was advised to join the Navy to get some direction. The problem with taking a young person with an alcohol problem and having them join a professional drinking club, I saw a lot of the world from a bar stool. I actually got out of the Navy with an honorable discharge, a miracle of miracles. My life was a downward spiral. Now in civilian life, I was working at a local utility company where everyone drank, mostly to excess. My shift, I was going to the tavern, and nothing was going to get in the way of that. Drink until I was drunk. Drugs were a bonus. Mind that had to be fulfilled. I blew off every commitment. My relationships, if you can call them that, were almost non-existent. Hung out with people that were like me. They thought that I was fun. Regular people, family included, distanced themselves. Of the fewer and fewer people that did associate with me, I only brought hurt. I distanced myself from family, and as time went on, my friends too. I did to less and cared even less about that. Very negative impact on me and those around me. One night in Edmonds, after a lot of drinking, I decided to run my mouth. I had a knife on me at the time and was charged with reckless endangerment. I one phone call and decided to call my sister. When I was released, it was on a bond put up for me by a drinking buddy. He put up his Volkswagen Rabbit for my freedom. He reminded me of this by holding up the bonding sheet and stating that he owned me. My decision to attend AA and to get into a treatment center was offered by a judge, and I took it. During my court proceedings, the judge gave me clear direction to get help and attend AA meetings at least twice a week. If I did these things, my charges would be deferred. At meetings, I was told to get a sponsor, read the big book of AA, and do the 12 steps. I worked with him and others that have gone before me. I learned how to clean up the wreckage of my past and take daily steps to prevent wreckage of the present. I had no idea how long a road or how hard a trek back it would be. I was told that I get to keep two things going into my life of sobriety, my name and my birthday. Everything else had to go, and that is where I started. I have been attending AA meetings since May 30th, 1990, and I do not plan to stop. It is a gathering with people like myself that remind me of where I came from and where I would return to if my program is not maintained. I need to always remember where I came from. The path I was on was one of pure destruction to myself and those around me. There's an old saying in AA that people that stop going to meetings don't find out what happens to people that stop going to meetings. I don't ever want to return to that life, so I keep doing what it takes to prevent that. I find that my time spent dedicated to continued sobriety has incredible value. I have made great friends that I support, and they support me. This is my life now, and I don't want to forget, again, where I came from. If I can help someone just starting out like someone helped me, then it is all worth it. Getting clean and sober is terrifying, and going through it alone is a really bad plan. I live my life now in a way that hopefully inspires people. I have a purpose that I never had before. I had fully expected to be dead by the age of 25. There was no need to plan beyond that. My life today is beyond any lie I was busy telling when drinking. Now that I'm clean and sober and on the right path, my life has become amazing. I sleep. I can look myself in the mirror and be okay with what I see. I pray for others, and I hope that I live a relatively long life. Now, if I go to the hospital, I know I'm there. Nothing like having your doctor ask questions about your injuries and you can't explain them. I now have true connections with family, my wife, kids, friends. I am a person that contributes to society, not takes away from it. I know that if I had continued on my path, my choices became very limited. Most true alcoholics wind up in one of three places: mental institutions, jails, or a morgue. Truth be told, I'd probably live and suffer loneliness such as few do. I know that I would not be married to the most amazing woman in the world, have wonderful kids, an amazing job, or self-respect. For a person like me to have become successful is another miracle. I used to sit on a bar stool and dare God, if he existed, to strike me off it. I think he was out of lightning bolts because he sent the cops instead. In his way, that's exactly what he did. And I gave my life to the Lord on Halloween Eve, 1992, during a drum solo at a Bloodgood concert. So that was definitely God finding me. I have not had any interaction with the authorities since I got sober, nor has anyone ever said that they own me again. There is a peace that never existed before. There had been nothing in my life when drinking and using, and today I can say that I love my family, my church, my friends. I no longer have a God-sized hole in me. He has filled it and placed so much in my life. I've now been sober for 29 years. I've made plans for the future. I have a real life and real ambitions and hope for tomorrow. I didn't have that before. So, thank you.
That's awesome. Am I on? There we go. Hey, will you guys join me in just praying and thanking God for Bob's life? It's extraordinary. Holy Father, I just thank you. I thank you for meeting Bob's challenge to strike him. And I thank you for the way you did it so profoundly. But I also thank you for the reality that this was not a one-time event. It's been day by day for year after year after year. And the practice of meeting with others and sharing the story and sharing the fellowship and strengthening one another has been so foundational to this being able to continue on and grow and develop. I thank you for the incredible man that this man is. I thank you for his wife and his kids and his friends and the amazing things that he does. God, I pray that you would just continue to pour your blessings out on him. I pray that you'd continue to fill him with your spirit and you would use those gifts in him to breathe life into others. In Jesus' name, amen. So I just want to close by saying, if you want to change the direction you're going, you got to change what you're doing. And I don't know what that'll look like for you. But I know that for Bob, he would tell you again and again all day long, it's worth it. It's worth making the changes. It's worth setting aside the time for him. It's been AA meetings and probably a whole slew of other things as well. I don't know what it would be for you, but maybe you do. Or maybe God will show you if you get serious about it and don't just continue to head to a place that you know is not a good place. If you're doing stuff that's really good right now, build on it and let the compound interest fill your account, man. That's good stuff. Stay with it. Be encouraged. And don't give up. Know that it will pay off. Keep walking. Keep stepping. Keep moving forward. Bob, thank you for sharing that. That was vulnerable, and it was powerful. It's powerful what God has done in your life, and I appreciate you letting us kind of experience that with you. It's one thing to do that in an AA meeting. It's another thing to do it with a bunch of church people. Let's worship together.